Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our weekly COVID-19 public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer for Montgomery County Government, and joining us today is also in this press briefing, Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Acting Health Officer, as well as Adriana Hochberg, who is a Climate Change Officer. Members of the media, all of you should already have permission to record. And just as an extra announcement, we had some connectivity issues during the pre-live, basically Zoom crashing. If that happens, please log back in and join us again. Come back in, okay? So with that, let's toss it to you, Mr. County Executive Marc Elrich.
And thank you all for joining us for our weekly press briefing, and happy first week of fall. This morning, I attended a groundbreaking over in Twin Brook Corner on Rockville Pike. It's a multi-purpose commercial and residential development located at Twin Brook Metro Station in the city of Rockville. This transit-friendly development will be anchored by Wegmans, will be an attractive location and destination for companies looking to grow, and there's a significant amount of both housing and commercial development slated for that site, not just retail commercial, but office commercial. I want to thank BF Saul, the developers of this project, for their outreach and work with the local community. Mr. Saul made a point during his remarks about the importance of working with community and involving them in the project so that what gets built fits with the broader community vision. I'd have to say that was a refreshing conversation. As our economy continues to recover from pandemic impacts, projects like Twin Brook Quarter will be very important to our job creation and smart growth goals. Back to the world of COVID. Today, our test positivity rate is 2.34%. And we have a case rate of 12.03% per 100,000 residents. We're still hovering around the 100 cases per day. Many multiples of where we were a couple of months ago, but a little lower than we were a couple of weeks ago. We're still defined as a substantial transmission area, according to the CDC, one of the few jurisdictions in our region in this category, as you can see from this map. In case you're wondering what you're looking at, the orange in the map are the substantial transmission, and the red is high transmission. And of course, that only applies to Maryland. According to these data, we currently have the lowest positivity rate in the state. While it's good to know that we're doing comparatively well, we can't ignore the fact that the Delta variant has wreaked havoc on our nation and our state over the summer. Our case rates are higher now than they were this time last year when we didn't have a vaccine. As you can see from the following,